Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you a review of Viltrox's 28mm F4.5 autofocusing chip lens. They call it the chip because it is so thin. Now, I've already looked at this lens previously on Sony and Fuji, but surprisingly, I've actually enjoyed it on Nikon more than what I did on either one of those platforms. I've tested it primarily on my Z8 because of the higher resolution, but I was intrigued with putting it on a smaller body than the Z8. And fortunately, it coincided at the time I was able to do my Z5 Mark II review. And so I've really enjoyed it there as a truly portable lens. At just 95 bucks, I suspect Viltrox is going to sell a number of these on Nikon as well, because frankly, it's a lot of fun. This will be a quicker review because I've already covered it thoroughly multiple times. I do want to give you a quick disclosure before we jump in. This lens was sent to me by Viltrox for assessment. However, they have had no input on my review. They will not see it before you. All of my conclusions are my own. This is an f4.5 lens. That means it has a fixed aperture of f4.5. There is no stopping it down further. Furthermore, it is autofocus only. There is no manual focus ring. You are going to be solely relying on autofocus. There is no front cap or front filter threads. All you've got here is a little lever that allows you to open or close a covering over the front glass there, or the front element. Now, I will note, as I have previously, that it does a little bit of a pulse when you first turn it on, and if this is open, it will extend beyond that. If it is not open, obviously it's not going to extend beyond that and won't do so until you actually open that front. So no, if you look through the viewfinder and you do see black, you need to remember to open that up. This lens is not much thicker than a lens cap. And it has grown a little bit because Z-mount is the largest of any of these mounts. And so as a byproduct, the lens by necessity had to grow a little bit, but it is still unbelievably tiny. I mean, you really have never encountered an autofocus lens that is really quite this small. It's quite impressive in that regard. 63.5 millimeters or 2.57 inches in diameter. And so that is 5 millimeters larger than what it was on Sony, for example. It is 16.8 millimeters in terms of its thickness, if you want to call it that. Its length, it hardly feels like any kind of length at that point. So that is 1.5 millimeters longer, so it's a total of 0.66 inches, and so less than 3/4 of an inch from the from the back of the lens to the front of the lens. It weighs in at 80 grams, and you say that's really, really light. Well, that's by far the heaviest iteration of this lens. At 80 grams, it is 20 grams heavier than the E-mount version, but it still is only 2.11 ounces. This is one you'll throw in the pocket and forget that it's there. Now, one change that they have made is that the lens mount material is now a black aluminum alloy. It looks really cool. Just kind of ties the whole thing together aesthetically. Definitely my favorite of the look so far instead of a shiny or chrome-like material. We do have a USB-C port here for firmware updates. However, that is the only thing even close to a feature we've got. There's nothing on the barrel. There's hardly any barrel, and no filter threads, nothing like that. Inside we have 7 aperture blades. They are not rounded. And obviously, because you're not opening and closing, it's just not really even blades. It's just a 7-pointed opening to the aperture iris. You can focus down as closely as 32 centimeters, but your magnification is very low, just around 0.10 or so times. There is no weather sealing on the lens. However, that little bit of front glass is covered with an HD nano multi-layer coating that they say is water resistant and fingerprint resistant, although it's such a small opening, you're gonna have to work really hard to get fingerprints on there. How about autofocus? Autofocus comes via a VCM or a voice coil motor. It is quiet and it is reasonably fast. I mean, this lens is so tiny that you don't expect a lot from it. And autofocus, you can actually, the difference is you can see it happening. There is some thrust that you can see here back and forth, and will see occasionally some pulsing as well as a part of it. It's not always super confident. It's like it's got thrust and speed, but not always necessarily accuracy, at least as far as that first pull. However, once focus is refined here on Nikon, it is good and accurate. I found that IAF worked well. It nailed the various targets that I pointed at, and it's good because you need good focus accuracy because there is no manual focus to back it up. And so it does fine with that. In lower light situations, you are going to slow down a bit because it's a maximum aperture of f4.5. But I found that it was able to focus okay without any issues there. On the video side of things, autofocus pulls are not impressive. Here on Nikon, they are poorer than what I saw on Sony. Definitely a lot of pulsing, and you can see it's like it's got that thrust, but it doesn't know what to do with it. And so I think probably a firmware update or two down the road may refine that behavior a bit, but as it stands right now, it's a little bit rough. It does obviously also show some significant focus breathing. Not surprising in a lens so small. There's not a lot of places inside the lens barrel for the elements to go. My hand test, on the other hand, where I could put, my actual program settings in, I thought it looked better than just the pulsing back and forth and the focus pulls. And it showed a reasonable amount of confidence in going from my eye to my hand and back and forth. And so your mileage is probably going to vary according to circumstance when it comes to video AF performance. Now, optically, I'm not going to do a deep dive because I've done that previously. If you want that, you can check out the Sony review, for example, which is at even higher resolution. In this case, however, the lens continues to have the same optical design on Nikon. It's 6 elements in 6 groups. 2 of those are extra low dispersion, 2 of them are asphericals. MTF actually looks quite good, really, particularly in the center and still good in the mid-frame, dropping off a bit into the corners. What surprised me is that this lens exhibited what I felt like was better contrast in a lot of situations on Nikon. I can't really tell you why, but on my Z8, I was pleasantly surprised by how crisp a lot of real-world images look. Now, I will say at the same time, however, this lens continues to have somewhat of an old school look in that the coatings don't feel like that modern, super high corrected. It's not a very Viltroxy kind of Viltrox lens. Viltrox typically has very good corrections. And so in this case, there's almost a bit of a glow if there is any kind of like side light at all. And so it almost looks like you're shooting in like a log if you're coming from a video perspective where the contrast is just raised a little bit. However, you'll find that if you have less, side lighting, you'll get more contrast. But at its best, this lens does look better for some reason on Nikon. On the technical side of things, it does have just the tiniest amount of distortion. I only used a -1 to correct it, but you can see it's not completely even. There's a tiny bit of a mustache pattern there, and if it had more distortion, it'd look a lot uglier. Fortunately, it doesn't. It does have a ton of vignette here on Nikon, and I'm not surprised that, from Sony, it's relatively small, lens mount opening. You scale up to Nikon's much larger, and vignette becomes more of an issue, and it's been the case on basically every third-party lens that I've tested, Sony first and then Nikon afterward. In this case, you have to max out the sliders 100% to get that vignette taken care of. Now, you can do it, but it does take maxing that out. Not really any kind of longitudinal style chromatic aberration, no fringing before and after plane of focus. There is a bit of fringing in the corners, lateral style chromatic aberrations, not strong, not really a big issue. You'll find that in terms of resolution, remember there's only one aperture value to shoot it at, so it's going to be quick. In the center of the frame, really, really great. And so if you're composing, I would say even within the rule of thirds, this lens is surprisingly sharp for such a tiny little optic. So the center looks really good. Mid-frame is a little bit less good, but still in the good level, I would say. And the corners they stay largely good until you get to that final little percentage right at the edge, and then things drop off. But I shot a number of landscape images at f4.5, that's the only option, and they looked really quite good. And so I was happy overall with the results that I got. In good situations, you can get a surprising amount of contrast and images that really do have a fair amount of pop to them. Again, it's pretty amazing when you have basically what looks like a lens cap mounted to your camera. The bokeh quality is only so-so. Again, you can't focus super close. You only have a maximum aperture, an aperture of f4.5, and so you're not going to get strongly to focus backgrounds, and I do think that there's a little bit of outlining there. It's not amazing. It's not the worst I've seen either. Color rendition is good. I like Viltrox's optical glass, and here on Nikon, it was a nice fit. Good colors, and sometimes you do get that unique look to it because of the contrast being raised, and so you'll either like or hate that. Flare resistance is not fantastic. There is no lens hood. And, you know, I don't know what the coatings are like here, but there's a variety of different flare artifacts that you will encounter. Some of them, as you can see, this quick shot of my wife with the sun behind her, it's pretty dominating to the image. And you can also see that sunburst effect, which again, you have no control over that because it's f4.5 all the time. It's going to be present, and you're going to have to decide how you're going to compose to deal with that. My conclusion is, however, that for less than $100, this lens is a lot of fun. And if you're looking for an inexpensive lens just for like walk around shooting, maybe some street shooting, this lens is surprisingly fun. It could be an interesting lens to just drop into your bag if you're traveling, if you're primarily shooting with longer focal lengths, to give you a wider angle of view. It's actually a fun lens, and I gave my daughter a new camera this year, and I gave her the E-mount version of the Viltrox, and it's been the lens probably that she's used the most because it's just fun to use. It has a unique rendering, and so if you're not really into clinical overcorrected, you might love the look of the images you get out of this. I think it's going to be a cult classic. It has obviously sold very well on these other lens mounts. I see no reason why it should do any less good on Nikon. It's little money and potentially a lot of fun. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you want more information, you can check out the description down below. I will throw the link to the full text version of the Sony E-mount version of the review if you want to check that out there. There are buying links if you'd like to purchase one. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.